All right. Thank you, computer.
Right. And let's see, we got some people popping in. Welcome everybody to Composting with Worms with our good friend Enviro Challenger, John Inch. I am Gator, and I'm here with Janda from the Enviro House. And we're gonna let everyone populate here. We're just starting out. So thank you for joining us on this Tuesday afternoon. An interesting.
Recording in progress.
What?
Right? Yes. Welcome everybody.
Did it say it stopped?
No, I monitor it on my phone too.
Oh.
So I was just let in. That was So we are
all seeing behind the scenes here, folks.
right. Composting with Worms with our good friend John Inch, Enviro Challenger. Janda's here. If you're new to this event, you'll notice that you're not going to be able to speak freely or be on camera with us right away. But we do encourage you to use the chat. In fact, I will type something in the chat. Welcome, everyone. And if there's a little drop down there, it says to, and it says all panelists. Do all panelists and attendees, and you can send it to everyone. So hi, everyone. Welcome. We're getting some people populating here. You can also ask a question in the Q&A feature of this at the bottom of your screen. You can type Q&A or go into the Q&A and ask a question in there. So if you have anything that's pressing, and we will try to ask those questions of our host, of our guest, John, as they come up, or if there's a good moment to stop right at that point. So do bear with us. If I don't ask the question right away, I will get to it, or I'm waiting for a point where it makes more sense to ask that question. Another place we can have interaction is with the poll. There are poll questions that we'll ask during this presentation, and we'll start off. And what it'll look like is when I put up this poll, you'll have a couple seconds to answer. And they're all anonymous, and you can answer. Sometimes it's one answer, sometimes it's multiple answers. And this first question is, well, it doesn't have that on there, but it says, how did you hear about this webinar? Did you hear about it from a Facebook event, through Tacoma Sustainability? Did you hear it from the Enviro News, email, Enviro House workshop, workplace email, friend, colleague, or family member, or other? And you can then answer that in the chat. Go ahead and answer that now. Pick how you heard about us. I heard it from let's see, friend, colleague, or family member. So I'm going to put that on my poll. So go ahead and answer. Oh, and this one, I think it has, that's what's happened. We had some changes in the thing, so people are able to answer the other questions. So I hadn't intended on that, but you might as well, what is your experience with composting worms is right there. And we'll save the other question for the end. So if you haven't tried it, I'll put this poll up again and we'll see if we can't get those answers. So go ahead and answer the question now. And if you skip the one about composting for now, that'd be great. Let's see. Gonna go ahead and end the poll now. And Janda, why don't you tell us about what's coming up on the webinar, on our webinars here at the Enviro House?
Okay. We have coming up on Wednesday, the 21st, we'll be doing electric vehicles with Sarah Sweet, finding out what all the latest is on the types of vehicles, how they run, how they work, charging stations, pretty much everything you want to know if you're going to go out and make that decision, make a purchase. And that will be Wednesday, the 21st at 4 o'clock. So you can register on the, well, probably close to where you registered for this one, but on the City of Tacoma Enviro House website, or when you see this come out in Enviro News listserv, that's going to be posted tonight after we finish this one. And then on the 24th, Saturday, the 24th at 10:30, we have one that is proving to be really popular. A lot of people signed up so far for how to pickle cucumbers and different kinds of vegetables. That will be with Hal Ming, who has done some of our other food webinars with us. So those are the two coming up, and probably taking August off. So.
Great, and I put in the address cityoftacoma.org/workshops, where you can register for upcoming workshops, find more information about EnviroHouse, and reminder that this is being recorded and it will be on YouTube soon at the City of Tacoma playlist. And you can go to cityoftacoma.org/workshops and find previous events that we've done or webinars, and this one and future ones. You can always look forward to watch them there again. So without further ado, because we have much ado, let's get our friend John Inch in here. And why don't you go ahead and take it away, John?
Outstanding. Sounds like much ado about nothing. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us today. My name is John Inch. I work for the City of Tacoma as an Enviro Challenger educator. I've been with the city for 15 years now, teaching in the schools throughout the city, as well as workshops at the EnviroHouse, and providing environmental services resources at community events. And in my downtime, I am a full-time, part-time farmer. I have about 5 acres out on River Road between Tacoma and Puyallup that I do my best to walk my walk about composting. And so today I will be talking about composting with worms, which worms we want to use, some interesting facts, and some fundamentals of building your own worm bin. And at the end there, I'll share a few of my own successes and failures in my win, lose, and draw. At the end, I'll save some time for some questions. And during the presentation, if there's some questions that come up, I'll try to remember to stop periodically and ask if anything has come up. And with that, here we go. So why worm compost? It's like, why compost? This is one of those things that it's a great way to reduce your garbage that you create. We can eliminate organic materials going to the landfill. We're gonna get some awesome materials for ourselves at no cost, for free. It's gonna save us some money. With worms, we get this awesome time release type fertilizer with those castings. We get a lot of nutrients that are readily available for the plants to take up. Calcium is one of those materials that we often amend our soils with, especially if you're growing tomatoes or those wonderful cucumbers that we're going to talk about next week for pickling. And the calcium helps to fight blossom end rot, and it's a vital nutrient. And when a worm eats eggshells and passes it through, that calcium is immediately ready for a plant to take up instead of having to wait for it to break down. So worms kind of help break down those materials so that those micronutrients and some macronutrients are readily available. For me, with worms, I like icky things. So, composting, especially if you got kids, they like icky things. And it's a great low maintenance pet. Now, worms. Which worms? Why? Where do we find them? There's something like almost 3,000 species of worms on the planet. Charles Darwin was fascinated by worms as much as we hear him when it comes to the theory of evolution. He was really fascinated by worms and their role on the planet. I mean, we've got giant worms. Lately, people have been hearing about the hammerhead worm out in Texas. There's marine worms, there's parasitic worms, all sorts of worms. Worms have been decomposing things in nature forever. I mean, this is why we don't have piles and piles of leaves and branches and dead animals in the woods, because worms and other bugs are breaking that stuff down. Earthworms are actually that classic worm that we often think of. You go out on a rainy night and you find it out on the sidewalk or out on the path. Their nature is plows, and they're great tunnel makers. And we find out on rainy nights where their holes are, because they're kind of sticking out of that hole. They fill in with water, and so those holes bring water and air all the way down. But then the worm brings the nutrients from deep down back up to the surface. So it's kind of a cool, turn, bringing the nutrients back up so that the surface can have it. Earthworms burrow down something like 3 feet. And so those nutrients that are there are kind of locked away from the surface. And so worms bring that back up for the surface plants. And they live mostly in cool, dark, moist soils. So earthworms are really better suited for outdoor composting and not so much in the bin. There's not going to be as many of them. And, it's because they like to go deep. Whereas red wigglers, which is actually the star of our show, the major composter that we're going to be looking at, they are significantly smaller. They're often found outdoors in the top 6 inches of the soil. You'll see them a lot of times if you move any sort of pots, rocks, or bricks that are on the ground. And, because they're small, they're well suited for these shallow containers. And because it's a shallow container, it kind of represents the fact that they live near that surface. And you'll get a lot of them for a container. I think the last time I read something about ordering worms, the approximation was for a pound of worms, which is generally what you'll order, you'll get 1,500 red wigglers, but you'll only get about 500 earthworms. So you're getting a lot more critters out of the earthworms to do some work for you. And you can find earthworms and red wigglers sold as bait at a lot of stores that sell fishing supplies. Make sure you're reading your titles right, looking for red wigglers. But you can go out and collect them outside. Like I said, red wigglers are found around pots and rocks at the surface of the soil. So you don't have to look too deep for them. Or you can order them online. And I have some references for online ordering of worms at the end, including right out there in Yelm. I find worms to be wonderful. So here's a few little tidbits about worms. They have no teeth. They have this tiny muscular mouth that they then have a gizzard attached to. So they kind of pull off small little portions of whatever it is they're eating, and then it goes into this gizzard. And the gizzard might be familiar to you if you've heard about birds or turkeys, things like that. All those birds use a gizzard to grind up their food. So worms eat dirt, sand, and so they use that with this gizzard, which is a muscle, and it kind of grinds the food like 2 pieces of sandpaper back and forth, and then that makes the food available for digestion through the rest of the worm, and then it breaks it down much easier. They have no eyes, so they can sense really light and dark, and so that's kind of how they know when it's time to feed. They like to eat in the dark at night. They don't like to stay in the light too very long. I find it amazing, but worms have 5 heart-like structures. I mean, that's really it, just 5 hearts. Pretty cool. A lot of heart. One of my favorite myths about worms is that if you cut a worm in half, you'll get 2 worms. No, you won't. You'll just get 1 worm and an old tail. Worms will regrow the tail section, but they cannot regrow their head. So it depends on where you kind of cut that worm as to its chances of regrowing. Worms are both males and females, and even though they are, like the song says, it still takes 2 to make a thing go right. But with the worms, as long as that bin is a happy home, you won't need to turn on any music or light any candles or have a romantic dinner for them. They'll take care of that business themselves. And once the worms mate, it's that band. If you're familiar with the worms, they have this about an inch from the top of their head, or depending on the size of the worm, maybe a ½ inch or so. There's a smooth section, and that's where the reproductive organs are. And so once they go head to head and they come across those 2 spots, when they mate, they have all they need to make new cocoons. They'll lay a new cocoon at least like once a week, and each cocoon could have 2 to 5 worms in there. So once they start to lay the cocoons in their colony, they just reproduce each other, and they just keep on going. And when a worm passes away, they live about a year in the worm bin. And once one worm passes away, because they're like 90% water, 95% water really, they'll just kind of dissolve into the worm bin. And the worms hold a silent vigil. One of my other favorite things about worms, and why we like to use red wigglers is because they eat about their weight each day in food. But remember, they weigh only ounces. Maybe only an ounce. I don't know, maybe not even that much. Our worms' whereabouts. What kind of home are we going to provide for our worm? We know the type of worm that we're looking for. Now we want to kind of think about the type of home that we want to have them in. If you're somebody who's crafty, a DIYer, somebody who likes to do DIY projects, you could definitely build one out of wood. There's lots of pallet wood and scrap wood around that you could put something together. The only downside to wood is that it tends to absorb water, and they can dry out a little bit more so. So you'd have to be prepared for that. A plastic bin is also something that's pretty available. They're usually fairly cheap, and you can kind of find them around. You might even have a plastic bin at home where you've lost the lid, and this is a perfect project for a bin like that, because I'll talk about it later on. You don't really need the lid. Excuse me. But if you'd also prefer to have something that is made for you, something that is just assemble and go, there are a number of commercially available worm bins, and you can find things like worm towers online. You can go ahead and do a little search, and you'll be amazed at all the different kinds of bins there are out there. All right. So what a worm wants. We need a home. We need some bedding and some food. So for our home, I'm going to take a little time here and talk about making a bin simply out of a plastic Rubbermaid type container. This is what I've used in the past. I find these to be probably the simplest thing to make them out of. They have a small footprint. As you can see by the picture here in the middle, it's really only the size of that container. And there's a couple of ways you can go about doing this. If you are going to use a plastic bin, all you really need to do is drill a series of holes along the edge. You can see by our picture on the left side here. I generally drill about a 1/4 inch size hole along just the long side. And I do about 2 rows like it's pictured right here. And if you're really just going to do one bin, all you got to do is drill these holes, fill it with your bedding, add your worms, eventually some food, put a lid on it, and Bob's your uncle. You got a worm bin. You're ready to go. If, on the other hand, you would like to take it another step further, if you notice in the other picture on the right side, we've drilled some holes in the bottom of one of the bins, and then we're going to nest it inside the second bin to collect the excess water. So once we get the bedding in there, we're going to do some spritzing with water, and if we over spritz, that could be bad for the bin. But if we have these holes, we can actually drain that off and collect that and make our own little worm tea. And as you see in the middle picture, they took the lid from the bin that is being nested inside of, and they used it as the bottom. But as I said earlier, if you lost the lid, you could always use a piece of cardboard to kind of loosely cover the top. I've even seen some people that have taken like a black garbage bag and just draped it over the top, or used a couple of bungees to secure the lid to keep it from blowing away. It doesn't need to be airtight. Again, we're drilling holes in it so that the worms can have air circulating around. If you drill bigger holes, I've seen some plans, like the EPA has one where they showed drilling I think a 1/2 inch hole or so along the side. You would probably want to put some screening over that so that the worms didn't crawl out. I tend to use, like I said, a 1/4 inch hole because I'm a little bit higher, and then there's less likelihood of them crawling out. But this is a really down and dirty, simple way of building a compost bin really quick. Like I said, you can probably find these at home, missing a lid someplace, and we've got a great use for it. And you know, it can be dark like these, opaque, you can't see through them, or you could even use a clear bin if you had one at home. Just put it in a dark spot. Before we add our worms, we have to give them their furniture. So we've got the home, that's the bin, that's the box. Now we need to give them their furniture, you know, bedding. So for this, we're actually going to use scrap paper, shredded newspaper. The Tacoma Weekly is a great example of a publication that you can find all over, and it's affordable. I think it's free. And so you can use this, you can shred them up in like 1-inch sizes. You can use some old cardboard, again, tear it up in about 1-inch strips. Oh, for those folks that are concerned about identity theft, step right up. The worm bin is your greatest security measure. You shred your news, you shred your financials, you shred your bank statements, all that stuff, and you throw it in with your worm bins. And in addition to eating the food scraps that you're going to put in there, they are going to eat this paper material, and it will become castings. And I promise you, once those financial statements have gone through a worm's gut, nobody can glue it back together and steal your identity or your financial information. So this is a great way to get rid of that old paper shred, because you can't recycle it in the city of Tacoma anymore. So give it to your worms. So before we add our bedding though to our bin, we need to pre-soak this material. You can't go in there dry like this because the worms will not like it one bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring out the old salad bowl, as big a bowl as you can find, really. And then we're gonna soak the paper in there until it's pretty well saturated. And then as we bring the paper out, we want to wring out that paper so that it's not dripping wet. We want it to be damp, but we don't want the water to be dripping off. And the analogy I like to give for how damp or how wet it should be is, think about the towel after you have gotten out of the shower and dried off. It's not dripping wet, but it's damp. Or another one would be the sponge you use to clean up the kitchen table. You don't want to leave a trail of water behind, but you want it to absorb any crumbs or anything like that. So that's kind of your measure for how damp the bedding should be. You're going to want to put in probably about a 3-inch layer of bedding material. And in addition to paper, though, you know, in the fall, you could collect some old fall leaves from outside, or any old straw you might have too. That would work as well. And so if you vary this bedding material, when we put in our food scraps, we'll get a very rich nutrient-based compost in the end. Along with the bedding, though, I do recommend that you keep a spray bottle nearby, because you're always going to want to keep the top layer of your bedding wet, sprayed down a little bit. This will help to keep the fruit flies away. It'll make the worms happy, and it'll help absorb some of the odors that might develop. After we've got our home, after we got our bedding, we've now got to think about some food. You can give your worms food scraps that are fruits and vegetables. They can be pulverized eggshells. They can be tea bags, coffee grounds. You can give them unbleached coffee filters. Worms will eat all sorts of food waste, but that doesn't mean we should just feed them all sorts of food waste. We want to watch out for things that are going to go putrid when it starts to rot, especially things like meats. So we don't put meat in the worm bin. Dairy products tend to smell very bad when they start to spoil, so we don't put any dairy products, no cheeses, no milks, things like that. I don't put any oily foods. I don't really put, like, you know, any cereal. I eat all my cereal, so it's not like I'm gonna put any cereal in there. But nothing with sauces on it. So any salads that have sauce on it, that shouldn't go in the worm bin. That was a conversation that I had to have in my household. Some folks like to put Italian dressing on the salad for everybody, and I'm not a big fan of Italian dressing all the time, so I just asked if we could do unsauced salads to let people put their own dressing on, and that worked great. And that way, if there's any leftover salads and fixings like that, it can go in the worm bin, no questions asked. Coffee grounds is something to watch out on. Too many coffee grounds can make the worm bin acidy. Citrus is another one. Too many grapefruits or oranges or any of the other citrus peels that might go in there, they're very acidic, and so the worms will avoid those fruits. And if it's a lot of coffee grounds, it just kind of shifts the pH balance in the bin to an unpleasing level for the worms. So a few coffee grounds put in there, like if it's from home, that's great. But if you're bringing coffee grounds from the office home, that's too much. So, you know, that's good for around the blueberries, but not around your worms. I'd like to pause for just a moment to see if anybody has any questions. I feel like I've shared a bit here, and I want to just touch back and make sure that folks are still with me and address any questions that have come up.
Well, John, thank you. So far, so good. And we do have a couple of questions. One might be, it's something we discussed pre-show about the temperature that I think we're going to get to in a bit.
Yes, I will talk about temperature, I promise.
I'll hold on to that one. Another one is compost bin similar to a worm bin? I've seen a lot of worms in the compost bin. Thank you.
That is an excellent question. And there definitely when people talk about a compost bin, it's very different. So a worm bin is something that you're not going to turn or really do anything until you're ready to collect those castings out of it. So we're going to use worms in a smaller container and let them do the same job that they would do outside in a larger compost bin. But in a compost bin, a lot of times we turn that. So we get a pitchfork or a shovel or something in there, and we rotate it around so that all the bits and pieces get presented to the critters in the bin. And so that's a compost bin, or that's outside composting. And it's a little bit more involved and you know, takes up a little bit more space. And so that's sometimes why worm bin composting or having a worm bin is a little bit more attractive, because it's a little easier to do. It takes up a little smaller space. And we're still getting rid of those food scraps. I hope that answered that question. If it didn't, I'll be happy to come back to that by the end. But yeah, big difference there is that the compost bin outside, we're gonna be active with it and turning it. In the worm bin, they will not like you turning their worm bin. So don't flip it around or turn it upside down or anything like that. Just leave it in its spot.
Thanks. You can. Yep. I'll get to you if there's any more. I'll let you know.
Excellent. One thing about the food is always make sure that you have the bedding material nearby, some paper stuff nearby, and that sprayer nearby. You know, we're putting food waste in this bin, and it's going to sit there, and it is going to attract flies. I'm not even going to pull any punches on you. Fruit flies are a reality when we're dealing with a worm bin. So the more bedding that you have there to have over it, the better. So you don't really want to see, like these pictures show here, you don't want to see the food. You always want it to be covered with the bedding, and then give it a spritz so that the worms will be attracted to go up to that. And this way you can kind of control for pests and odors and help the worms kind of stay in the dark a little bit more. You know, a worm bin is a fairly easy thing. If all goes well, like I say here, it can be fairly easy. You just got to give them some food, watch that water moisture level. You want to make sure that the air is moving through there, and you want to watch the temperature. So when you feed your worms, especially the first few times you feed your worms, try to use the corners of the bin. This way, you can start paying attention to the things that they like or don't like. Yes, worms like and dislike certain foods. It's kind of more about like the struggle of eating it. So like if you can present it to them in smaller bits and pieces, that's a little bit better. I'm not saying it's got to go through the Cuisinart. You don't have to do that, but a couple of extra chops, because remember, they have a tiny mouth and no teeth. So the smaller, the better. Uh, just for example, lesson learned, a few years ago, we were growing broccoli, and like a lot of folks, I don't really like the stem as much. So we chopped the stem off, and it was about a 2-inch section, and it went in the compost pile, or the worm bin. And there it sat in the corner of a worm bin for, I don't know, 2, maybe 3 more rotations of food. And it wasn't until I actually cut it into small little pieces that it finally started to get eaten by the worms. So, presentation can be everything. And like I said, they do like and dislike things. But if you use the corners, you can pay attention to that. And you can also begin to see how fast they actually eat, and how well they actually eat. So, that helps. So those first 4 feedings, maybe even 5 for the dead center one. But if you use that as a way to kind of figure out, then you'll know what not to feed, and how fast, and all those kinds of things that go in it. And if you live in the city of Tacoma and you find that there are things that aren't going in your worm bin, you can use your organic waste container outside. The brown bin is a great place to get rid of all the no's for our worm bin: meats, cheeses, dairies, greasy foods, saucy foods, all that stuff. All that can go into the brown bin in the city. It's coming out to the curb. And anything the worms don't like can also go in that bin.
Hey, John.
Yes, sir.
Let's take we have that second poll question about experience with composting.
Oh,
Why
yeah.
don't we go ahead and put that up now, since
Yeah.
we didn't get to it officially. So, and this will be a good point, and then we can move on to that, because I know Watch the Temperature is coming up. So
Yep.
I'm going to ask a poll right now. What is your experience composting with worms? Now, some of you came to this with some experience, some haven't. Go ahead and answer now. I haven't tried composting with worms. I've tried composting with worms, but was unsuccessful. I successfully composted with worms, but they unexpectedly died. I have a worm box, need to know how to set it up, get worms and start. I compost with worms, but want to learn more about feeding and maintenance. So we're kind of right there. That's kind of why this was a good spot for it. So give you guys a few more seconds. Looks like almost everyone's picked a solution here. There we go. One more. Come on now. All right. I'm going to go into the polling in 10 seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6. Now, John, I like the broccoli stems, just so you know. So I'll come over and eat those.
I've learned to appreciate them. We just got to pick it at the right time.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. Yeah, you have that experience. All right. I'm going to stop the poll. Let's take a look at our results so we can kind of see what people are saying.
Okay.
Okay. Good. All right. Thanks, John. Go ahead.
All right. Cool. Well, hopefully after this, those of you that haven't tried it might give it a shot. Those of you that have tried it but have not had the successes that you were hoping for, maybe we'll learn a few things here, and I'll get you more success. And I'll share some of my own failings in the end, like I said, and that hopefully will help you a little bit. So like I said, feed the worms in the corners, learn the dislikes, don't likes. For monitoring that moisture, this is where you want to keep a spray bottle nearby. It's really good to actually mark it, especially if you're going to be having kids around. I know that in the last year, people have gotten into a lot of different kinds of cleaners around. Some people use vinegar. Worms don't like vinegar. Vinegar and water look a lot alike. So yeah, you want to make sure your water bottle is labeled water. That way, anybody who reaches for it knows exactly what they're getting. When we're fluffing it, that paper can sometimes compact a little bit. Wet paper tends to do that. So we might, use some old salad spoons or an old spatula to lift and fluff any compressed bedding, every once in a while. You want to keep the extra bedding around so that we can cover our food. That way we can, again, combat the odors and any pests. And then temperature. The ideal temperature range for a worm is a lot like a person. We tend to like temperatures between the 40s and, well, maybe mid 70s. I was going to say 80s, but even at 80, people start to get like, it's really hot here. And I know that we just went through these super hot days of triple digits. And so the worms definitely do not like that stuff. And so if you can work on finding a spot where the temperature range will stay between the 40s and maybe 80 degrees, and avoid the direct sunlight for too long, especially in the summer. our summer sun gets pretty intense, and things are changing. Climate's changing. The weather patterns out here are pretty wild, especially this year. So we got to pay attention. If you're going to keep that bin on the back porch, just watch to see if it gets in the sun. In the winter months, we can put it in the garage. We can bring it into our house, maybe keep it under the sink. If you got a basement, you can put it in the basement. We can work on making some sort of deal in the house as to where we can put the worms to get them through some of the cold snaps that we have in the winter months for a week or two, and then we put them back on the old porch again and give them some cover. Sometimes those old slumber bags, sleeping bags are great for throwing over the top of the worm bin for a little bit to just give it a little bit extra insulation and protect it from any cold temps.
So John, let me read you the question because you answered it. I just want to make sure that they understand.
Okay.
I have a worm bin and I have it outside in a shady spot. When the temperature got above 110 degrees, they all died. What should I have done? I didn't want to bring them in the home. So yeah, it seems like you just gave those solutions. Now, if you want to leave them on the back porch, like in that temperature, it seems like that's going to be just detrimental to them.
Yeah, you've got to try to get them. I know you said you had them in the shade, and the problem with the heat that we just had, and whoever that was, I don't want you to feel like it was. It's quite possible it would have been unavoidable. All right, so let's just ease any pain about that. All right,
not your fault. It wasn't
not your fault.
It was terribly hot.
Very dry, hot heat. It's equivalent to opening the oven and standing there feeling that blast out at you. So even in the shade, the temperature just hurt the body. I mean, I felt it hurt. It just hurt. So it's possible that worm bin, just even if it had like an hour of sun on those triple digit days, it just made it so hot inside the bin that it was just going to be way too much. And I've gone through this before myself. And it's part of my losses at the end. I got a few wins, and most of them is why I kept working with worms, but my losses almost set me off. And one of them was overheating, but it was nothing like what we just faced. So in that situation, unless you're going to bring it into the garage and get it like into the total shade, or again, bring it into the house, it's going to be difficult because you can't mist it because then you're overwatering. And it's just a challenge. It's a very big challenge, yeah. So I just want to make sure it's not your fault. Nature threw you a big curveball. All right,
John, and it seems like you mentioned in the wintertime, find a place in the cellar or somewhere different, or insulate it if you're going to leave it outside. But in the summertime, the coldest place you can find. If you don't want to bring them inside, I think that's where you kind of have to decide.
Yeah.
Are you going to continue to and again, we saw that temperature coming, and none of us were still prepared for it. Like,
for sure,
our air conditioners couldn't come fast enough from Amazon, right? It's just not happening. So,
but again, in the future, if you wade down this path again and you start that worm bin up again, and we see those temperatures come on either end of the spectrum. Let's face it, we get some cold snaps in the winter still. Just try to have a conversation with the household about this emergency situation. We create emergency warming shelters, we create emergency cooling shelters. We do these things for the humans. So, we definitely do them for our dogs and cats, but let's give some consideration to those worms that are doing a great job for us. Just a small window of time to give them a reprieve. Maybe then we could get an agreement. So
someone has suggested also smaller bins that are you can lift.
Yep.
Like for some people, if you can't lift a really heavy one, but smaller bins are a little more transportable. You can put them in different places. And
yeah. I personally like the shallow Rubbermaid container for it because it is easier on the body to pick up and move around for sure.
Great.
All right, so let's get down to the wrangling of these castings. So we made a home, we gave it bedding, we brought our worms in. One last thing about that, the worms and the bedding, the food. I forgot to mention this earlier. You're going to want to add your worms before you add your food. I know it sounds weird, but when you get the bedding all set and ready to go, add your worms first. Give them about 4 days to learn their home. They'll start eating the paper. Then go ahead and add the food to that corner. okay? Or wherever you're gonna go and pick that spot to start, and then go ahead and go from there. But give your worms about 4 days to adjust to their home. They've been shipped to you through the mail. They're gonna wanna take a few moments to learn their whereabouts. But after they've gone through all that bedding, all of those nutrients, all the food that you've put in there, and you've noticed that there's a lot more castings in there, and it's starting to fill up. You got about, I don't know, after about a month or two, I'm sorry, 2 to 3 months, you'll probably wind up with about 1.5 to 2 inches of castings, and you're going to want to get that out. So there's a couple of ways to do this. One method is that you can push all the castings to one side of the bin, place new uncomposted bedding on the other side of the bin, and bury some food under that for a couple of weeks. Stop feeding them in the old bin, new food in the new pile, and eventually the worms are going to migrate out of the old pile into the new bedding. It works really well if you use things that are very juicy, like watermelon or different kinds of fruits that have lots of juice, tomato juice, things like that, that kind of trickles its way into the other source. They'll follow that path. It's their yellow brick road, if you will. That method, that can take 3 or 4 weeks because they got to migrate all on their own. So that can take some time. Another method is to use a cone method. And this is where you're going to take all of your worm castings out and you're going to dump it onto a tarp or a newspaper in a cone shape. The worms, if you just give them a little bit of time, the worms will actually move towards the middle and bottom of that pile. And then you can go ahead and just sort out and separate out the outer portions until you get to the wriggling mass of worms. I've heard people make this cone method go faster by shining a light on it, like you're some sort of CIA interrogation outfit. Just beam the light on the pile. They don't like the bright light. They'll drive down to the deeper portion. And a person who was telling me about this said that, yeah, they generally get their castings cleared out with a light beaming down on it, same day. So it's a pretty quick method that you can do. If you don't have the light, you can just pile up in the cone, give them a couple of hours, they'll concentrate into the center, and then you can just separate out your castings on the outside. And once you have your worm castings separated from your worms, you're going to go ahead and put your worms back into a new bedding situation back in the same old house and start the whole process all over again with giving them the food and the bedding and keeping it nice and moist in there for them so that they don't get upset about being in wet or dry, scratchy paper. And then when you have your castings, this is where you can go ahead and use them as you please. Depending on the size of your bin and the amount of castings you collect, they can go into potted plants, they can go into raised beds. Again, anywhere you'd like. And these are great nutrients that it's great nutrient-rich material that's readily available for your plants to absorb and use. Now, sometimes things will go wrong. We talked about the heat. If you can see it coming and you can make some accommodations, go for it. Cold, if you see it coming and you can make some accommodations, go for it. If things get smelly, you might want to hold off on how much food you're putting in there right away. You could have more food than the worms are consuming. Maybe, you put 1.5 pounds and the worms are really only eating 1 pound every day. And so pretty soon you're going to have a buildup of more food, and that's definitely going to be attractive to more pests and definitely create more odor. So if you see like it's just too much food, then stop feeding and add more bedding. Definitely add more bedding. On the one where it says too wet, I hope you can see there's a little water in the hole, trying to show that some pretty muddy soil there. But in your compost bin, one of the things if it gets smelly is you kind of need to look and see if it's a little too wet in there as well. So if it is too wet, start asking how often people are watering it, if it's more than just you. So who else is spritzing it? Crack the lid so that it can evaporate out. Maybe not enough is evaporating through the air holes. You might add more dry bedding to help absorb some of the water, especially if you put it right over the top layer. It'll wick it up. And if it's a lot of water, like if you can actually, like in the bottom of that puddle, see the water forming in the bottom of your bin, dump the excess water out. It'll be great for your plants. It's a quick liquid fertilizer. This is also one of the reasons why I like the two bins that nest inside of each other, so that this excess water will automatically drain out on its own. Now, the other side of this is that it got too dry. Maybe the lid got bumped open and was left off too much, and so it evaporated out. Or maybe it was in the direct light. Or maybe too much bedding was added without a spritz. We're in a rush, we're merely human, so we make mistakes. So we put a bunch of paper in there and we forgot to give it a spritz. So if it gets to be too dry, really the remedy here is just spray it down, add more water, and get it to that point where it's not dripping wet, but damp. Win some, lose some. These are some of my experiences. These are mostly lose sums. I just to kind of make people feel a little bit better. I've never had 100% success here. I've had several failings, and these are a few of them. Back when I first started to do this, I was living in Marquette, Michigan, where I went to college, and it is cold there. It's on the shores of Lake Superior. And for one couple day snap, we had temperatures that hovered -50. And one night in particular, it was -65. And that was without the wind chill, just -65. So the place I rented had a covered porch. And I don't really think I need to say more. The next day, just about everything on that porch was frozen solid, including that bin. So, one of the things is worms don't recover from freezing at all. So that was a bummer. Actually, out here, several winters ago, maybe a decade ago or so, we had a cold snap in the teens over several weeks. And I had gone away on vacation over to Lake Chelan. And when I came home, I found my worm bin is also out on my back porch. Then I'm starting to see a theme here, porches. My worm bin was out on my back porch. And again, I came home to a frozen batch of worms. That moist bedding in there just got frozen solid. So cold gets them. Even here in Washington, those teens for a prolonged period of time will freeze those bins.
John, real quick on this frozen worm problem and the back porch that you need to maybe reevaluate, right? If the worms are dead in there, does one need to start all over? Like, should you dump that bin and start over, or can you just put new worms in there? Like, I know it's dead worms, but they're going to compost a little, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, they're like I said, like 95% water. So you probably, even in your normal bin in normal conditions, you would never know when a worm passed away on you. So in that situation, the only downside is that they all perished all at once. So that was a pretty foul smell. So in that situation, I started all over again. Actually, both those situations, I just started all over again. So I didn't just reuse that material because it was all the worms in my bin died. So it was
Right.
pretty catastrophic. So it was a fresh start on that one, on actually both the frozen ones. Actually, and even on my next one, the overheating, just because again, it's that the mass, too smelly, too much material in there. So my overheated one, this is going to be kind of a chuckle compared to what we just went through. But I moved out here in 1998, and in that year, being so new to Washington, we had a Washington heat wave, and it was 2 days of 90+ degrees. Crazy. That was a pretty normal heat wave at the time. And so I went to the coast for 3 days. Once again, worms on the back porch. They were in the sun for the better part of a day, 2 days, and it cooked them. So even in those 90 degrees, if it sits in the sun, that's just too much. It's just too much. And in that situation, I even found evidence of my worms trying to crawl away. So that's another telltale sign. It doesn't have to just be smelly. If you see your worms crawling out of your bin, something's not right in your bin anymore. So you got to start looking in there. Is it too hot, too cold, too wet, too dry, too much food? Those are some things to start looking at. So with all those things that I've learned, I no longer use the back porch. My worm bin is in the garage, nice shady spot. If it gets really, really cold out, I'll pull out some old sleeping bags. When it starts to get really, really hot, I look for an even shadier spot and just hope for the best.
We have a question about feeding. Oh, time for question and answer. The question is, or the comment is, I've heard freezing food before putting it in the worm bin will help with the fruit flies. Is that a myth? Is that a, what do you think?
I've heard the same thing. I've never tried it. Another plus to freezing the food too is it begins to break the food down because the cells of the stuff have frozen. So when the worms get at it, it'll be a little bit easier and a little mushier for them to get into. I've heard that before myself, but I've never tried to do it as an experiment to find out. You'd probably have to have two bins side by side to really
I'd also have to have freezer space, I think. That's
yeah, and freezer space. And then
I don't have a lot of freezer space. Yeah.
So, in a conversation like, what are you doing with this bag of frozen food? It's so, but those are fun conversations to have because, that's some weird stuff that's going on right there. And it kind of just makes people go, what are you doing? Oh, that's cool.
Right.
So if you've got the space and you want to try the experiment, go for it. There's no harm, no foul. And like I said, freezing it makes it start to go mushy faster for the worms anyways.
Someone said frozen broccoli stems.
Frozen broccoli stems, absolutely. Yeah. Brilliant.
Yep. I think we've started talking about getting a separate food processor for our compost to make it finer.
Yeah.
And especially for a worm bin, I think that would be the nice thing is that it's tiny pieces and can break everything down a little bit before we just toss it in there. So
yeah, and that's a great way to go too. Is to chop it up, mince it up, or whatever, and it'll go right on through there.
Now with a worm bin, if I'm doing one that's probably maybe 16 inches deep, am I gonna look to fill it up before I rotate it out? Or you mentioned the shell casing part, but
yeah, if you go with the deeper ones, I wouldn't fill it all the way up. That stuff gets pretty heavy. Those casings, those castings, that stuff gets pretty heavy after a little while. So if I had like one of those 16-inch deep tubs, I'd probably go, at about 6 inches. I'd probably start thinking about getting the castings out of there.
Separating the worms.
Yeah. Not only that, but it's going to take a while to fill that whole thing up, and you're going to want to have that material handy.
Now, I've seen some of the commercial bins with the little spigot.
Yes.
The drain plug. Is there something in that? The tea? Is there a compost tea from this?
Yeah. So some of those tower systems are built on the migration aspect of worms, and they have trays that you stack on top of each other and that you nest inside each other. And so you start with the lid and one tray, and below it is going to be a almost like a bowl shaped, an angled type bottom, and it's going to funnel the water that drains out, the excess water that drips out. It's going to funnel that down to that spigot, and then periodically you can drain that spigot into a bottle and use that as worm tea. You can use it straight up, or you can dilute it 1-to-1, or even a little bit more so to make it last a little longer.
That's not for consumption, human consumption, by the way.
No, not
recommended. Not that kind of tea.
Not that kind of tea. Don't drink this.
Someone had asked, would worms like wet straw instead of newspaper?
You can use wet straw as well if you've got it around. Especially now, a lot of people are doing backyard birds and things like that. So yeah, you could definitely use wet straw.
Fantastic. Oh, we have actually, sorry, I didn't mean to stop sharing. You have a little bit more, some resources to show there. So you might have to redo that. Sorry.
That's all right.
There we go.
And so yeah, let's see if I can get to the resources here. All right, so here's a few resources for you. A couple of books. In particular, I love Worms Eat My Garbage, and actually on this list, my absolute favorite is The Earth Moved, and it's on remarkable achievements of earthworms. It's a really good book, very interesting. So those are a few of those resources. And then if you're looking to order some worms, you don't want to go out and collect them at night, or send your kids out digging in the garden looking for worms. Here's some places where you can order them. I got a place out in Yelm and a couple of other places you can find online. If you email Janda at the Enviro House, she could probably give you, in addition to the Yelm one, some other references locally for worms.
Right, I can do that, and I just, if they don't want to get it out of the chat, they can email me at ehouse@cityoftacoma.org. And then I did just assemble a few and put them in a email to you guys so that you can put them in the chat, or I can.
I did put them in the chat. We're good there. I have found that if you put a piece of cardboard on the ground and get it wet for a couple of weeks,
yeah,
you peel it back, you'll get some more. And now I don't know, they look like earthworms more than, because I was feeding them to my chickens, but
right.
I don't know if they were red wigglers necessarily, but
yeah, it does get pretty challenging. And again, like I said, there's like 3,000 of them out there, but like an earthworm is definitely going to be something that's going to be, you're looking at something that's going to be, like as thick as a pencil. A red wiggler is going to be tiny. I mean, you're talking about something that's only going to be an inch and a half long, so it's distinctively different in size. So, and there should be whole bunches of them. So
right. And
that's a great way to go.
Aren't the red wigglers, from what I read, they're more of a surface worm?
Yeah, they like to live at the top.
Dig farther down, so they're not as good for the worm bins.
Correct.
So there are links for where you can get worms closer to home. Garden Sphere carries them. Yelm Earthworm Farm that John has in the links. There's a 3-in-1 worm ranch in Paulsbo, and Dinkelman Worm Farm in Enumclaw.
Yeah, and those are in the chat. And someone has asked, first of all, do paper egg cartons make a good source of bedding if you break those up?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that stuff's really great. And then do red wigglers survive the winter? I think, again, that's depending on how well you care for them, because it can get too cold here even for some of those winters. It's not like the Upper Peninsula there, but it can get cold. Cold for us.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, and the worms are fairly smart. I mean, like if it gets down into the 30s, upper 20s, they'll just kind of like go into the core and make just a little pile. They're kind of like how our body reacts. And, we pull the blood from out at our fingertips and we bring it down around our heart and lungs and everything. So the body preserves itself. So the worms do the same thing. They do that shell core effect. They go into the core so they can stay warm and they mass up. But if it gets to be too cold, again, like I said, minus 65, I don't know if I had to say too much more from that. It's tough to come back from that.
Well, the other thing is that if you're really successful and you end up with a ton of worms, maybe you need to talk to friends and family about trying this on their own and share the worms.
Good Christmas present.
Well, when we have worms at the Enviro House, when I had the worm bin that was being active and maintained, I shared those with a lot of people. We got a lot of worm bins started in the area.
Yeah, I mean, and if you start worms, I mean, really think about it. You really only need to share 2 with your friends because, they'll take care of the rest.
Right.
We do have one final poll question I'm going to throw out there. And that is, after this presentation, how likely are you to start or continue composting with worms? Very likely, not so likely, still unsure. Maybe you're on the fence about this. I know I have a bin that we got from our old resources there that I haven't I just keep waiting. Like, I'll do it this week. So,
I might add too, if you check with, if you want to get the bin ready made with just the stacking trays, and if you do check the Worm Factory, they are out of Bellingham, but the bins are manufactured in Portland. Pre-COVID, we had an arrangement with them for their municipal bin, which is 3 trays instead of 4, but they had a pretty good discount on it. And they were sending that, they would ship that to Pierce County residents for a pretty good discount. And you ordered it online. So you might, if you call them or talk or order from them, you might ask them if they're still doing the discount, even though we are not open at the present time. And we hope that we will get back there soon.
little Enviro House name drop there might get you a little discount. Thanks. Now, John, how many worm bins are you currently running right now? Do you just have one that you're going for? I know you have other compost stuff, but
Yeah, I just have one because I have a couple of substantial compost piles out here on the property. So I just have the one so that I can kind of maintain it. And actually, I am about to embark on trying to build a bigger one out of a water barrel turned on its side.
ooh,
Yeah.
well, you should take some
Go for it.
pictures and keep us posted on that. That'd be
Go
fun.
for a grand experiment there.
Very cool. Well, I don't see any other questions popping up in the Q&A or the chat. So I would like to, I'm going to stop sharing. I want to thank John for joining us and everybody out there in virtual e-house land for joining us on this presentation on worm composting. I hope it has sparked some interest into getting you into doing this, or help you, relieve that guilt that it wasn't your fault. It just was too hot for us.
It's just too hot. It's just too hot.
Just too hot. Nothing you did. So, but think about what can you do next time if it's too cold or too hot? What are you going to help with your worms? So.
Yeah, I think most of us that have ever done this have probably had at least one disaster, if not more. I have my share, and I did find the worms crawling away, little dead bodies all over. So sad.
It's a carnage.
Me, I'd be too busy trying to recreate the scene from Dune or Tremors with worms. So, all right. So thank you, everybody. I'm gonna go ahead and close this. I'll stop the recording in just a moment, but I'm gonna kick everyone out. Thank you, everybody. Don't forget, you can watch this again. Give us about a week, get it online at cityoftacoma.org/workshops. We'll put a new listing in there so you can click on this one, and you can watch the other webinars that we've produced here. So,
and we also have wasn't this thorough, I don't think, but John did how-to videos on composting and bins and worms, and he showed worm bins from the Enviro House when we did those. Those are on the city's YouTube channel. So if you go to youtube.com/City of Tacoma
/playlists,
and then look for the Enviro House playlists, you can see those.
Yeah, I'll put that in the link here. All right, everyone, thanks. I'm gonna stop recording and